I don't believe we should. I believe that the potential costs versus the benefits are not in our favor. The Pillsbury facility, it's nice and convenient to the high school, I recognize that, but there is a substantial cost to make that purchase, and then a larger substantial cost to renovate it and repurpose it into something that will work for our students. It is not being built, it has not been built with any kind of ability for new technology. It's basically dorm rooms and some classrooms and stuff, but it's old technology, old school, if you will. The cost to upgrade it to the point where it's going to be a 21st century classroom is prohibitive for the benefit we get out of it. I think we should move on and look for something else.
Thank you. Mr. Wall.
Not only do attorneys use all their time, but their favorite answer is it depends, and I think that's what we're left with here. It depends. What are the purchase price? What's your long-term planning for the district? It really depends. So I go back to process again. How do we address all of these issues in a way that's going to get us to the best result? Well, you first of all have to have a site facility plan that decides and determines what is our long-term plan in terms of space and facilities. Second, you take that issue to the stakeholders. You have a task force of all interested members in the community. You have them actively and meaningfully participate in that question, and they're going to then drive us into the right direction and answer that question whether we take it to a vote or not at the end of the day. So it goes back to process, but look, for now, we've got a credibility issue to address, we've got to balance the budget, and we've got to hire a new superintendent. Those are the pressing issues right now, and there's scarce time for anything else in the next coming years.
Thank you. Mr. Van Beurden.
I really have mixed feelings about the Pillsbury issue as well. I just don't think we have enough good information about how that area, that property is going to be used at this point. And so I am really not in favor of it until we get a really good clear-cut plan on how that property is going to be used. And I agree with, it doesn't fit into the long-range plan this district has for facilities. And I'm not sure if we have a long-range plan for our district, but I think we need one. Let's take a look at facilities, put together a long-range plan, and then we can kind of match up what property is available in this community that will meet the needs of that long-range plan.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
Certainly, I would go with KJ. It's not a simple yes or no answer. Right now, we have a lot of other pressing issues. Certainly, we're going to have to make sure we get our budget in order. We're going to have to get a superintendent. We have the levy coming up. We certainly have to look at student achievement, and we have some other things that probably be a higher priority on my list, looking at what we're going to do for possibly all-day kindergarten and some things there. So for the short term, I don't think it's anything that we can consider, but depending on what the plan is that's put together and what the community comes to, I would look at the community to hopefully kind of lead the charge on this, if that's really what needs to happen, and a clear plan that says this is what we're going to do. But right now, from a priority list, it would make it my priority list initially.
Thank you. Mr. Seabury.
I am also going to echo KJ's sentiments. I think that the priority number one for our district is a new superintendent. I think priority number two is to really understand our budget, and not just for this year and not just for this next year, but really for a decade. That's an overriding issue. It's a huge, enormous issue. The third thing is the facilities, and I know that there are people even in this room that put a lot of time and energy. Folks, this is a tremendously personal and emotional issue for a lot of us, and I'm very, very respectful of that. And it's out of that respect that I have to tell you, I don't know. I don't know the best purpose for Pillsbury.
Thank you. Kind of following up on that question, KJ Wall, this question will come first to you. Considering that the present building is old, are we ready for a new Owatonna High School? Mr. Wall.
Well, the one thing about giving the same answer to every question is I know I'm going to answer every question here. So, and hopefully you get to see a theme develop here. And it's, you know, again, the favorite answer of attorneys, it really does depend. You know, as others have commented, you've got to have your site plan, your long-term strategy for your facilities. And until we have that in place, I'm sorry, but anybody that thinks they can answer that question, I have to seriously question on what information they're making that decision or that commitment to. So Again, I go back, all of these issues, it's about process, you know? It's about, you know, establishing credibility, and how do you do that? You get all stakeholders involved, you have the influential members of our community come together, analyze the issue along with the board and the administration, teachers, and you get everybody going on the same page and in the right direction, and that's, everything else is cake from there. Everything falls into place once
Thank you,
have
sir.
the process.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Von Nerden.
Well, one of the issues with the high school, I think, is how do we apply or use the technologies in that building? It's old, and we have some major problems with that building as far as using the advanced technologies and the advanced teaching techniques and methods that are available today. And so unless we had a really good plan that was very economical for converting that high school into a more modern type high school, I would be in favor of going somewhere else with the building, simply because it's more economical. We just can't spend a lot of money in an old building and be successful and spend the taxpayers' money wisely. So I know people love that building, and I think we can take some pieces of that architecture of that building and build it into a new one, but I do think that it's an outdated building we're going to have difficulty using.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
I would certainly start with what's going to be the future of education. I can see education moving into a much more of a flexible, less rigid, everyone starts at 8 and classes always go from 8 until 9:25 and the next class is at 9:30 to whatever. I can see us moving to a whole different kind of an approach, and if we do anything different with the high school, it has to fit in with what education is going to be like in the future and not look at like what education was like in the past. So if we go down that path, it certainly has to be driven from an education perspective, what do we need from an education perspective, and drive it from there. That building right now is not very flexible, and I think we're going to need something more flexible in the future. So I think at some point down the road, that's probably going to have to be on the agenda.
Thank you. Mr. Sebring.
I'll probably say the same thing one more time. I do think that our number one priority is our superintendent, number two is the budget. And as we start looking at facilities, boy, if you thought Pillsbury was emotional, OHS isn't it? Just a tremendously emotional issue. And it is for a lot of us. I'm a graduate of OHS. And OHS becomes even more difficult to get your arms wrapped around simply because the 21 building, I mean, we're getting very, very close to that building having served our community for an entire century. And yet, as part of that building, there are some components of it that were built fairly recently that epitomize the direction of education and all the best things about education. I'll bet if I had dropped a marble in the hallway of the 21 building the day I graduated in 1979, I'll bet that marble is still rolling around. It was an old building then, it's an old building today. There's going to be a certain point where we've got to address it and we've got to face up.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Mr. Wall.
We need to consider whether or not that particular building will fit the needs of the future. We need to look into the future and find out what the future of education really is. I know we have a lot of students today that take AP classes, for instance, over at Riverland and maybe some other schools. There's a lot of online education. We have to determine if this is going to be a facility that can meet those needs. We really can't approach that, however, until we get our finances in order and get the superintendent in order. And then I think the next step is that we do that demographic survey that I talked about and make sure we understand what kind of class sizes are going to be coming into the system and determine what size the school needs to be. Do we need just one replacement school, or do we need to think about a second school, depending upon how much Owatonna grows in the future? We have a lot of questions that we can't answer. I don't think we can do anything with it at this point in time.
Thank you. Mr. Van Nerden, I believe we are ready for you for the next question. The question is this. This comes from our audience. It is not a popular option, but at some point we cannot continue to make cuts and keep the quality of education and programs expected by the community. What are the real options to get the needed funding other than expecting the state to send more money for education? Mr. Van Nerden.
I will make a couple of comments here. As my farmer friends talked to me at the fair, and I had announced that I was running for the school board, one of them came up to me and said, you know what, education is not funded correctly. And I agree with them 100%. We cannot keep funding education based on property taxes. It's not fair to the community, and it's not because a lot of those individuals who pay those taxes move to another community to buy their home and pay their taxes. And this is especially true of the real rural schools. So my answer is that I believe education needs to be funded more with income taxes and with sales tax, and unfortunately come from the state, because we just cannot continue to have property taxes funding the operating pieces that are operating part of our budget.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
Well, without getting a change in law from the state, we're going to have to get it locally. The state has been, over the last 10 years, pushing the funding of schools to the local level. That's just a fact. Unless we can get people at the state to step up and accept responsibility, we're going to have to fund more of it locally if that's what we really want. If we want to, as a community, say schools are important, we're going to have to do a little bit more on the levy than we have in the past. But that's just the way the formulas are. The way the formulas work. Our funding comes from the state and from local levies. Those are the two sources. If the state isn't increasing it and the state isn't willing to change the funding mechanism such that they drive it from a different method, there isn't any other place but to get it from local.
Thank you. Mr. Seabree.
I would tend to agree. I do think that the levy is going to be probably the primary resource for how we stem that gap. And the second would be, and it's my understanding that our relationship and our working relationship with the teaching staff does have some gaps in our model, and that I guess the appropriate way of saying this would be a level of creativity that we would ask on the part of our teaching staff to begin filling some of those gaps to allow for a little bit more of a cushion rather than just flat out dead, untaught time with our kids.
Thank you. Mr. Wolf.
I think we're going to have to accept that the only way to adequately fund the education that we want in this school and in this community is that we're going to have to pony up a little bit more money. I am, generally speaking, against taxes or increased taxes. I think we all feel we pay our fair share. I know we get our funding today from property taxes, and we see our building values drop and our taxes go up, and it just doesn't feel good that we might ask for more money. But without some additional money, an additional operating levy, then the school system is going to suffer, because we can only cut so much, and pretty soon we're going to cut not just the excess, but we're going to cut the essentials. And once we begin that, we begin a downward spiral, and the system doesn't become as good as it has been, and we can do this to the detriment of the community. We need a strong school system to remain a vibrant and growing community. So we're going to have to dig deeper into our pockets.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Wall.
We just have to focus on controlling what we can control. Okay, Ron's right, the funding mechanism is flawed, but we can't directly control that outcome. So there's two options. There's revenue solutions, there's expense solutions. On the revenue side, it's very simple. The only way that we're realistically going to have more revenue coming in is to explore an operating levy. And we all know how that works. That's increase tax burden. As far as the expense side goes, we've already gone through a significant round of cuts, and there's more to come. And we just have to make sure that we have a criteria for evaluating those cuts so that it creates the least impact on the classroom. For example, if there are teachers on special assignment, might be a time to call them back in, just by way of example. But I go back to the three issues: credibility, balancing our budget, and getting the right leadership in place. If we don't have credibility, we're never going to move forward on any of these issues. So we have to focus on those.
Thank you, sir. I believe, Mr. Anderson, we're ready for you. Is that correct? Okay. I guess I should keep track, shouldn't I? Hey, I am keeping score. Okay, Mr. Anderson, following up on the budget questions, we have a question here. Last spring, the district cut $1.8 million from its budget. Next spring, it will cut $1.2 million plus dip into its general fund. At what point does the district not just lay off staff, but also consider eliminating extracurricular programs